But I do think that male advocacy matters. I think it matters because it shouldn't be for women to try and advance the WPS agenda, for example. At the same time, if women are underrepresented in all of our militaries, then it serves to follow that our senior leaders' voices, women's voices, whilst powerful, might be quite singular voices. Well, a jolly good afternoon. About 70 years ago, my father, who was in the Royal Navy, was afloat serving off the Korean Peninsula. So it's lovely, 70 years later, actually, to be here today and to have this privilege, really, to speak with you. What I'm probably going to offer you is probably a practitioner's view, and I hope in so doing that I'm able to particularly address those who've just been completing the 3-week course here. Others are probably better placed, and we've heard really wonderful testimony from people. We've seen senior leaders exposing the issues and bringing it really to life for us. So I'll ground mine, if you don't mind, in relatively sort of low-level tactical examples. Of course, I want to absolutely endorse what we've been hearing about it being the right thing, about it being, as General Ingrid mentioned, operationally essential, and therefore the smart thing to do. And of course, all our countries have committed to do so back in 2000. But that's 23 years ago, and I heard an alarming statistic yesterday from Ajung, who said that on the current rate of progress, from 2000, it's going to take us 286 years to get there. That's not very encouraging, is it? And so that really does speak to the fact that it actually needs to be given urgency. It is wonderful to hear from His Excellency Ban Ki-moon about his leadership on there, to really give that urgency, to hold people to account. And of course, it's absolutely leadership, of course, that will make this succeed. So I've served in the Army for 21 years, and the first part of my career was almost exclusively spent on operational deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, a war and 5 counterinsurgency tours. But actually, it was my first exposure to the United Nations and my first peacekeeping tour last year that was actually the most complex thing that I had done in the military. And it wasn't just because I was at a higher rank and leading more people. It wasn't that. It was actually, of course, that the security environment into which we operate as peacekeepers is uniquely challenging. Almost everyone seems to be armed. You have no real way of identifying friend from foe. The violence that is meted out is very confronting and alarming. And as we've heard about, very regrettably, that violence is disproportionately meted out on women and children. So the most complex thing, and therefore you're going to want the most talent. So back to the operational essential argument, which is absolutely key to this, of course. So in Mali, in the military mission Sally ended, 22 million population, 14,000 peacekeepers, about the same in the Malian army, so a very small security element, and then a raft of security actors, most of them armed, some signatories to a peace accord, many not, tribal elements, different ethnicities, and a patchwork that's very complicated to operate among. And of course, to understand that patchwork, it's self-evident, of course, that you need to engage with the population in order to have a physical, visible presence of peacekeeping. You need to be able to reassure them and understand the human security situation, which means you need to talk with everyone that you can do that with. And of course, that takes you to a very clear responsibility to have women forward, out of the bases, operating in their primary roles in order to be able to achieve that mission. The task group that I commanded was 300 strong, and 10% of the force were women. So we were 5% short of where we are mandated to get to, so we're not there yet. Fortunately, though, and again, we were a bit late in the British Army as well to opening all roles to women. That came as well for us in 2016. We don't have women throughout all roles in large numbers, nor in all ranks. But it was clear that we needed to use women in their primary roles. And so whilst we did, on occasion, tactically necessary, group women in order to conduct female engagement, that wasn't our default setting. I think it would end up in a slightly perverse behaviour to end up with men only talking to men and women only talking to women. There may be some cultural reasons to do that at times, but if you want to get a raft of views, uncover bias, and get a complete perspective on things, then you want more free-flowing dialogue. So I think grouping tactically can be useful, but I don't think it should necessarily be the default. We did, for security reasons as well, try to make women quite visible on our patrols. We found that if you look at women being disproportionately the victims, well, men are likely to be disproportionately the perpetrators of violence in conflict. So you'd understand why when you patrol up to a village as an armed male, that the response might not always be warm to you. We certainly found that where there were women on patrol, that absolutely did create a different dynamic, that children would come out to play and that there would be a different dynamic at play. From those conversations, of course, bearing in mind what I've just said, that would also provide a more complete picture of the situation. It was brought out really wonderfully earlier, that wasn't just about the security situation, it was about water and access to healthcare and education. Human security, in all of its guises. From that, we would then use that to form a start point for further engagement. And you'd rapidly uncover that there were women's groups in various villages and towns that you needed to engage with, but you wouldn't have found access to them had you not started making inquiries about human security in its wider sense. From that, where it was culturally appropriate to do so, people would then conduct the equivalent of a shura or a meeting in order to understand more about the human security situation. What we uncovered in a couple of instances was that markets were essential to livelihoods, and that normally that the traders and largely the customers were actually women in the markets. But markets were also the targets for robbery, illegal taxation, and violence. So by conducting patrol activity, which was very deliberately synchronized with market activity, you could plot out the markets around various villages and towns on a calendar month, and you could synchronize your patrol activity to deliver peacekeeping effect in order to protect livelihoods, and in so doing, protecting women's livelihoods. What we also uncovered, of course, is that when you had those conversations, that people would tell you about some of the wider security, human security challenges that they face with access to food and water, and that would then drive the developmental aspect of peacekeeping as well. So by taking civil affairs with you, we would then identify project opportunities. Just outside Gao, we initiated a project which was about securing agricultural land for women so that they could grow crops, which they could then sell in the markets, but they're being protected by peacekeepers. So you can see a slightly sort of virtuous circle come together when you take a different perspective, perhaps, than might have been the norm. Likewise, in another town called Ansongo, we initiated a resource to support a women's peace dialogue process, whilst also helping to refurb the local radio station so that those sort of messages could be broadcast more regionally. So those are some of the low-level tactical activities that you can conduct. What are some of the pitfalls? I guess I speak to men and women on this. One is about, I suppose, about value. A woman's value on a peacekeeping operation is not because they can talk to women. That's useful. Their value, of course, is they're throughout the force and that they are recognized for the talent that they bring, and that's equitable. Secondly, just avoid tokenism. I think it's quite obvious, but we don't want to sort of undo the good that people are trying to do by making it tokenistic. Likewise, give people agency. When I grouped people together for a tactical effect, I'd explained to them previously why I believed that was necessary. And I was very clear that it was an additional responsibility for which I was content to do as voluntary basis. Because I think, again, you don't want to single people out for things and somehow make them feel different. People have talked a bit about some enabling environment factors, and I think those are really clear. We've talked about, I think today, recognition of barriers, and gender barrier studies can be really helpful in uncovering the evidence that you need in order to drive policies. We've heard about, I think, national action plans, various countries on their 5th iteration now, I think the UK is as well, in terms of trying to drive that through into concrete policies that are then actually enacted. I think we've heard a bit about culture as well today as well, which of course is one of the most difficult things to change in any organisation, particularly a large organisation. But there are lots of good examples of cultural practice taking root through really good leadership at all levels. And it's not just a senior level responsibility, of course, it's at all levels throughout the ranks. But I do think that male advocacy matters. I think it matters because it shouldn't be for women to try and advance the WPS agenda, for example. At the same time, if women are underrepresented in all of our militaries, then serves to follow that our senior leaders' voices, women's voices, whilst powerful, might be quite singular voices. And how much better, of course, if those voices are supported in a chorus of other voices, male voices included, which can advocate for this really important issue. I think there is, within those policies as well, a case for positive action and really proactive policies that actually support, with training and education, women, peace and security. I think sometimes when people hear that term, positive action, they hear something else. I think they hear discrimination or something else, and they worry that there's some sort of fallout on them. And people referred to, I think earlier, as a zero-sum game, and that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about are the correct policies, well-planned, data-driven, which actually do what they're supposed to do and provide opportunity for women to have career advancement. So no military is at gender parity. 286 years if we don't do something about it. So it serves to follow, and it's great to have a conference like this because it provides a community of interest. It provides a community of shared experiences and practice. And I hope also serves as something which is galvanizing into something which we're all signatories to, but won't always be the number one priority on a country's mind when it's looking at all the other competing issues on its agenda. So I'll pause there. I think there's questions later on today. I'll stick around for those. But thanks very much for your time.